There's a bottle sitting on a drugstore shelf right now, somewhere between the toothpaste, the deodorant that costs about $5 and refuses to die on your skin. People who've worn it for 30 years say they can still smell it on a sweater after the sweater's been in the closet for a season. They say it outlasts bottles that cost 20 times more. And here's the part that should make you pause. Most professional perfumers, the ones who trained for a decade to compose fragrances for the big luxury houses, will never mention it to you. Not in interviews, not in master classes, not when a journalist asks them what they wear on their day off. There's an unspoken rule in that world, and the rule is that you don't point customers toward the cheap aisle, because the cheap aisle is where the empire cracks. The bottle I'm talking about isn't glamorous. It doesn't come in a heavy glass flacon with a magnetic cap. It doesn't have a celebrity face attached to it. It's usually labeled with one word, parfum, or sometimes a generic floral or musk name. It sits on a metal hook in a plastic blister pack, the kind of packaging you'd associate with batteries. And yet, ask anyone over 50 who grew up wearing it and they'll tell you the same thing. It lasts. It just lasts. Through work shifts, through humid summers, through laundry cycles. The question is why? Why does a $5 drugstore scent cling to skin and fabric longer than a $150 eau de parfum from a Parisian house? And why, when you ask a perfumer about it, do they suddenly start talking about something else? To understand this, you have to understand what actually happened to the perfume industry between roughly 1995 and today. Because the bottle on your dresser is not the same bottle your mother or your grandmother bought under the same name. It looks the same. The box is the same. The font on the label is the same. But what's inside has been quietly rewritten, sometimes 2 or 3 times, by an organization most consumers have never heard of, the International Fragrance Association, known as IFRA. IFRA sets the safety guidelines that the major fragrance houses follow, and over the last 3 decades they've restricted, capped dozens of ingredients that used to be the backbone of long-lasting perfume. Oakmoss, the dark green heart of every classic chypre, was severely restricted. Real birch tar, the smoky leather note in old-school masculines, was limited. Certain musks that hung on skin for 20 hours were phased out. Bergamot was capped because of photosensitivity. Lyrol, hydroxycitronellyl, atronol, the list goes on and on. Every reformulation, the big houses swore the new version smelled identical. It almost never did, and more importantly, it almost never lasted as long. Anyone who owned a bottle of the original Mitsuko, the original Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, the original Coco, the original Lauder Knowing, the original Chanel No. 19, will tell you the modern version is a ghost of what it was, faded within hours, pretty but quiet. Now here's the thing the industry doesn't shout about. The small, cheap drugstore fragrances, the ones made by companies that aren't members of IFRA, that operate under different categories like body splash, body mist, or simple parfum oils, were never bound by all the same restrictions. Some of them still use formulations closer to what perfumes smelled like in 1982. They use heavy synthetic musks, the workhorses, the ones called Galaxolide and Iso-E Super. Ambroxan in industrial quantities because those musks are cheap and they are absolute monsters on skin. They sit there for hours, sometimes for days, broadcasting a soft, clean, slightly powdery hum that the brain reads as freshly showered human. That's why people keep saying their $5 drugstore body spray outlasts their designer eau de toilette. It's not magic, it's not nostalgia. It's chemistry, and it's the chemistry that the luxury world had to walk away from when the safety caps came down. When consumers started demanding natural and clean, I want to pause here for a second. Because if you've ever bought a designer bottle, sprayed it generously in the morning, discovered by lunchtime that you smelled like nothing at all, this video is going to make a lot of things click into place. And if you want to know which other cheap bottles quietly outlast the expensive ones, which exact drugstore picks rival $100 designer releases, which luxury reformulations got gutted the worst, go ahead and subscribe. The names I'm about to drop are the ones the fragrance counter staff will never volunteer. While you're at it, drop a comment and tell me the perfume that has lasted the longest on you in your entire life. The one you can still smell on an old scarf, and the one that betrayed you, the expensive bottle that vanished in an hour. I read them. I want to know what your skin remembers. Okay, back to the bottle. The $5 bottle people keep whispering about isn't a single product, it's a category. On Reddit, in R, Fragrance and R, Designer Fragrances, you'll find threads going back years where people compare notes on the drugstore scents that refuse to fade. Names come up over and over. Coty's classic line, the old Jovan musk, Coty Vanilla Fields, Skin Musk by Bonne Bell, Love's Baby Soft. The original Wind Song by Prince Matchabelli, Sand and Sable, Navy by Dana, Jean Naté After Bath Splash, the Taboo Eau de Cologne in the red box. These are the survivors. These are the drugstore fossils that have been on shelves since the 1970s and 80s, and the formulas, in many cases, have been touched far less than the luxury formulas, because nobody at IFRA was particularly worried about a $5 splash sold next to the shampoo. The big houses had to reformulate because they sell millions of units worldwide and they get scrutinized. The little drugstore brands flew under the radar, so while Guerlain was rebuilding Shalimar for the fourth time, Jovan Musk kept being Jovan Musk. And here's the brutal little secret. A lot of people in the industry, the noses, the evaluators, the people who actually work in fragrance development, will privately admit that some of these cheap drugstore scents are masterclasses in tenacity. They were built before the rules tightened. They were built when a perfumer could load a base with 5% of a synthetic musk and nobody blinked. They were built for women and men who wanted to spritz once in the morning and not think about it again until they undressed at night. That kind of performance on a luxury launch in 2024 is almost impossible to achieve under current guidelines without spending an enormous amount of money on raw materials. So the cheap bottle isn't beating the expensive one by accident. The cheap bottle is using a recipe the expensive one is no longer legally or commercially allowed to write. Now, before anyone runs to the drugstore and starts grabbing bottles, I want to be honest about what's hype and what's real, because this nicho lives or dies on credibility. It is absolutely a verifiable fact that IFRA restrictions have forced reformulations of nearly every classic perfume launched before 2000. And you can read the IFRA standards yourself, they're public. It is a fact that synthetic musks like galaxolide have extraordinary longevity on skin and fabric, and that they're used heavily in inexpensive scents and laundry products. It is a fact that fragrance concentration matters. A parfum or extrait sits around 15% to 30% aromatic compounds. An eau de parfum around 15% to 20%, an eau de toilette around 5% to 15%, and a cologne or splash often under 5%. That math alone explains a lot of disappearing acts. Where the perception gets fuzzier is when people claim a specific $5 bottle outperforms every luxury fragrance ever made. That's not true. It outperforms many of them on raw staying power, yes, especially the modern reformulated ones. But the luxury scents are doing something more complex, more layered, more artistic. The drugstore bottle is a hammer, the luxury bottle is a violin that someone keeps unstringing. And then there are the outright myths, the ones I want to bury right here, because if you've been doing these, you've been sabotaging yourself. Myth number 1, rubbing your wrists together after spraying releases the scent faster. No. The friction barely warms the skin enough to matter, and it doesn't crush molecules. What it does do is mix the perfume into your skin oils unevenly, which can mute the top notes briefly, but the longevity is the same. Stop apologizing to your wrists. Myth number 2, more sprays equal more longevity. Past a certain point, more sprays just equal more sillage, more projection in the first hour. The dry down lasts about as long as it was always going to last. The base notes are what cling, and you have a finite amount of skin real estate. Myth number 3, putting perfume in the fridge preserves it forever. Cool, dark, stable temperature, yes. Refrigerator with the onions and the leftovers, no, the humidity cycles and the door slamming actually accelerate certain breakdowns. A drawer away from sunlight is fine. Myth number 4, expensive always means longer. We've already destroyed that one. Here's what does work, and this is where the actual buried trick comes in. The one that turns even a $5 bottle into something that lasts from breakfast to bedtime. Perfume binds to fat. It hates dry skin. Dry skin is a runway with no grip. The molecules just lift off and evaporate. So before you spray anything at all, whether it's a discount drugstore parfum or a $200 niche bottle, you moisturize the spots you're about to spray. An unscented lotion, a plain body oil, even a thin layer of petroleum jelly on the pulse points. The fragrance grabs onto that fatty layer and releases slowly, sometimes doubling or tripling the time it stays detectable. This is not a TikTok trick. This is something fragrance counter staff at the old department stores used to tell customers in the 1970s. It got quietly forgotten when the industry shifted towards selling you a second bottle for the gym bag and a third for the office desk. Because here's the thing, and this is the part that should make you a little angry. The industry makes more money when your perfume dies at noon. You reach for it again, you finish the bottle faster. You buy another one. A scent that lasts 16 hours on one application is, from a business standpoint, a problem. A scent that lasts 3 hours is a subscription. Layering is the other buried weapon. Take your cheap, long-lasting drugstore musk, the Jovan or the Coty or the Bonne Bell type base, and spray it on first, on moisturized skin. Let it dry for 30 seconds. Then layer your nicer, more expensive, more interesting fragrance over the top. The cheap musk acts as a fixative, a kind of scaffolding that holds the prettier notes in place for hours longer than they'd hold on their own. Perfumers do this in the lab all the time. They call them base accords, and they're built right into the formula. When you do it at home, you're basically rebuilding the kind of heavy, long-lasting base that modern luxury releases have been forced to thin out. You're hacking the reformulation back into shape. The result? On a humid day, on a stressful day, on a day where you can't reapply, is a fragrance trail that behaves like the bottles your parents wore. There's one more thing, and this is the part I've been holding back for the end, because it ties everything together. The $5 drugstore parfum that fragrance lovers keep pointing to in the long, quiet Reddit threads. The one that gets called out in Fragrantica reviews from users who've worn it since 1979. The one that's been spotted on the shelves of Walmart and CVS and Walgreens for under $6. That triggers an almost religious loyalty in the people who wear it. Isn't beloved because it smells like a masterpiece. It's beloved because it smells like a person. Clean skin, soft musk, a whisper of powder, something warm and human and unmistakable. It doesn't try to be a Parisian garden or a Moroccan spice market or a leather-bound library. It tries to be you, slightly better. And it does the one job a fragrance is supposed to do, which is be there at the end of the day when someone leans in close. The luxury industry has spent 30 years climbing further and further from that simple promise, building scents that are conceptual, artistic, expensive, and gone by lunch. The drugstore quietly kept doing the boring thing, and the boring thing won. So if you take one piece of action from all of this, here it is. This week, walk into a drugstore, skip the designer counter, go to the bottom shelf where the plastic bottles live, pick up a classic musk, a Jovan or a Coty or a Bonne Bell skin musk, something under $10. Moisturize your wrists and neck, spray once on each. Then, if you want, layer your favorite designer over the top. Walk around for the day. At 9 at night, lift your wrist to your nose. I want you to come back and tell me in the comments what you smelled. Once you experience an $8 scent outlasting your $120 bottle, you don't see the fragrance aisle the same way ever again. And if you want the next one, the next buried scent, the next reformulation scandal. The specific luxury bottles that got gutted the hardest between 2005 and 2015, that one is already loaded up and ready. You know what to do to make sure you don't miss it.